And then we have Kamal, who does new construction. So if you're looking to do either add-ons or just ground up construction, or you're looking at a tear down, he's really the specialist on that. We had an event, actually Karen was our host in Oakland when we packed the room. And then our latest sponsor is skylight.com. And they have really cool new technology to provide. They're a GC, but they're a full service GC, and they're using technology to the extreme, like super hardcore use of technology and efficiency. And their goal is to remove some of the headaches involved with with working with contractors and so on. So those are our sponsors. So thank you for that. Thank you to my members. And then Yana, you want to say a couple of words?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you for joining. Just want to introduce myself. I'm Bobby's partner. So we're working on a lot of exciting things and hope to keep bringing you guys good content.
Yeah. So thank you, Yana. And in our future, maybe if we have time today or in our future meeting, we'll show you a couple of new things that we're doing. So with that, look, I'd love to, I did attend one of Katy's webinars that she had done a couple of months ago. And then a common friend introduced us. And then I was already impressed by the time I listened to her webinar about 2 months ago. And so I reached out to Katy and we connected, and we're like, hey, what is going on with the cannabis industry? She specializes in that. So I'm really thrilled. I know a lot of you are looking into that space or are already in that space, right? So so you're going to find this information that Katy is going to be sharing to be extremely useful. Feel free to ask questions. You can chat questions to me, and I'll relay those to Katy, and then at the end of the session, hopefully. And then if you want, we can unmute you and also, have you ask questions live. But with that, Katy, I want to thank you for your time. And let's see if we can, you have control and you can take it from here.
Okay, how long do I have?
40 minutes, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A.
Excellent. Okay, well, let me go ahead and get started then. Let's go to you. Bear with me a sec here.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so let's go back. Am I going back here? Okay. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear and see properly? If not, please chat, Bobby.
We see the folder. We don't see the presentation.
Dang. All right. Let me undo that. And, one sec here. No, it always works just fine when I'm not in a rush.
Do you have two monitors?
No, I don't.
Okay.
There we go. And done. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'm not sure what's happening here. All right, let's go back to the Zoom. Share the screen. Okay. Now,
okay. Much better.
And let's go into slideshow mode. Okay. Excellent. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Katy Young. I am an attorney. I represent lots of business owners, real estate investors, and specifically with an interest in the cannabis world. So today, I'm going to talk to you about some of my favorite subjects, the intersection of cannabis, real property, and investing, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So thank you for having me today. little bit about me. I own a law firm called Astra Law Group in San Francisco. We are only fighters, not lovers. We do all business and commercial litigation, real estate disputes, construction defects, and professional negligence. We will do general counsel work if needed, but that's our main thing. We're very good at a few things, and I'm going to talk to you about how those cases play out. So before we get into a discussion about the good, the bad, and the ugly, I'm sure we have varying levels of knowledge about cannabis. So I'm going to fly through some of the basics so that everyone understands the tension between federal and state law that we're dealing with as we move forward in this subject matter. So the number one thing to remember is that marijuana is still a federally illegal substance. It's still a Schedule I controlled substance under the Federal Controlled Substances Act. As far as the federal government is concerned, cannabis is as bad as heroin, LSD, or ecstasy. So that's the framework that we start with. Moving forward in time, the government, the Obama administration under, back in 2013, issued this memo that's known as the Cole Memo that basically came out and said, we, federal government, are not going to spend our time and money going after state legal cannabis businesses because so many states had started their own cannabis scheme. So the federal government said, look, as long as you're not involved in these dirty 8 things that we care about, we're going to leave you alone. So as long as your business is state legal and you're not distributing to minors, you're not selling to gang cartels, you're not diverting from legal states to states where it's not legal, you're not growing on public lands, and all these basic things that the government considers really bad. The guidance from the Cole Memo back in 2013 was, we will leave you alone as long as you're legal and you're not engaged in these couple of things. Super. For 5 years, we had that guidance. And then on January 4th, 2018, then Attorney General Sessions came in and withdrew the Cole Memo. The government often speaks in code. So what he did when he withdrew the Cole Memo was to sort of like flex this muscle about we hate cannabis. But what he told the federal prosecutors was to go ahead and use the well-established principles that govern all federal prosecutions, which really includes the budget that you have, whether this is a high priority issue, those sorts of things. So while it was a good political stunt for the Trump administration to say we've withdrawn the Cole Memo, the actual guidance was we're not actually going to change anything that the Cole Memo had laid out. And that has continued to be true. Since the rescission of the Cole Memo, we have not seen an increase in federal prosecutions. Currently, the best protections that state legal cannabis businesses have for operations in their state where it's legal is the Rohrabacher-Blumenauer Amendment, now I believe called the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which is a budget rider that restricts the Department of Justice from spending resources to enforce federal law against individuals or companies that are compliant with their state medical cannabis laws. Which is essentially a power of the purse issue. So there was the guidance from the Cole Memo saying, fine, as long as you're state legal and you're not doing these bad things. Then rescission of the Cole Memo saying, yeah, I'm gonna flex this muscle, but also we're not changing anything. And then the continued renewal of this budget rider amendment means that really the federal government is not spending money prosecuting state legal cannabis businesses. But as you'll learn in my presentation today, to be a state legal cannabis business is a hell of a lot of work. And so we still are always concerned about some sort of federal prosecution. And I'll explain how to get through that in a minute. So that's the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment. Then let's go to the basics in California. So California actually has the United States' oldest and most developed medical marijuana marketplace, starting with the Compassionate Use Act all the way back in 1996, which created health and safety code that said that qualified patients with serious medical conditions that have a doctor's recommendation can possess and cultivate marijuana for personal use. The practical impact was to basically provide an immunity defense from prosecution if you were cultivating and distributing marijuana to licensed, patients with medical recommendations. So that's how the whole medical piece got started in California. And then over time, we've worked on refining it. So the first was 1996, Then 8 years later, we added to this health and safety code with the Medical Marijuana Program Act, which implemented the ID card system that we had for a long time, which actually still exists. You can still get a medical ID card, and that would prevent immunity from arrest. So another good step in the right direction. Further, the 2004 Act allowed for the creation of what we'd know as collectives, collective dispensaries. And so you probably have seen marijuana dispensaries all over the Bay Area since 2004. And those were allowed because these were medical patients who were cooperatively and collectively cultivating cannabis and selling it, but it had to be not for profit. And so out of this not-for-profit language, the lawyers who were trying to help cannabis growers become legit businesses created something called the Mutual Nonprofit Benefit Corporation. Watch out for that. If you're working with a potential opportunity and you see something that says Mutual Nonprofit Benefit Corporation, you can rest assured that these people have not updated their records since the passage of McCursa in 2018, which I'll get to in a second. 4 years later, in 2008, the California Attorney General gave us some further guidelines. I'm not going to go through all of those, but just trying to show you that this has been an issue in California for a long time that we've been building up to. Then in 2015, there was the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, which changed, authorized for-profit businesses. So this is why we start seeing the drop-off of the creation of mutual nonprofit benefit corporations. And then required licensing for cannabis collectives. So moving forward, then there was the ballot initiative, Proposition 64, the Adult Use of Marijuana Act, ALMA, as it is known. And that was 2016. So this act would have allowed for, and does allow for, decriminalization of possession of cannabis for recreational use and reduces all sorts of penalties. So we treat it more like alcohol now. If you have less than 8 grams and you're over 21, 8 grams of concentrate or an ounce of cannabis, and you're over 21, then it's not an issue. And if you have more than that, then it's a misdemeanor and not a felony. So that's great. You can also cultivate up to 6 plants per household if you're 21 and over. And then this act laid the framework for the state issuing licenses for adult use cannabis businesses by January 1, 2018. So you might be thinking, well, wait a second. So we have this Adult Use Act passed by the voters, and then we have this Medical Use Act that was passed by the legislature. Why would we have 2 schemes? Well, we don't anymore. We had to play alphabet soup and put these all together. So what exists today, the governing law in California regarding cannabis, is called MCURSA, which combined the Medical Cannabis Safety Act and the Adult Use Marijuana Act. A couple of things survived through the melding of these 2 different sets of laws. One theme that you'll see throughout this presentation is the maintenance of local control. This is a political compromise that I'll get into. Mandating that state licenses begin issuing by January 1, 2018, even if you're just a medical collective. And then businesses had 1 year to get their stuff together if they hadn't been licensed by January 1, 2018. So that's the alphabet soup that we're looking at here. Now the main thing here I'll direct you to is MCURSA, the Medical and Adult Use Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, which passed in June 2017. And so some people have some basic questions about, what can people do, right? If you're over 21, you can have an ounce of cannabis, you can grow 6 plants in your private residence. You landlords out there can you can ban cultivation of cannabis on your property, and there are many good reasons to do so. That's the state law. I'm gonna keep coming back to the idea of local control. Cities and counties can enact and enforce their own regulations that are more stringent than what the state allows. And so this is, there's some jurisdictions who simply don't want cannabis within their borders, and they can choose for themselves as a city or a county whether to permit commercial cannabis activity and how. And here's the note here that property owners and landlords can ban the use and possession of cannabis on their property, notwithstanding all of this. You can purchase cannabis at licensed retail establishments. You can give it away as a gift to anyone over 21, but you can't receive compensation for that. So maybe a good idea for your Christmas list this year. You cannot use cannabis on private property without authorization. So again, for those of you, I'm sure most of you here are landowners, that's your private property. You can set the rules. Except for medical patients, there's different rules for them. They can possess more. And then of course this sets up a big tension between, well, what if you have a long-term tenant that you love? He's been a great tenant, but the guy's got cancer and now he has a medical recommendation and he needs to possess marijuana on this property. There isn't an answer to that dispute yet. I'm not sure anyone wants to be the guinea pig because there's serious medical concerns that come into play. Things you can't do. You can't use cannabis in public places unless it's a licensed establishment. So there are some dispensaries who have like an extra party room in the back that you can rent and have an on-site consumption event there. If you want to have a consumption event at a different place that you don't own, you may need to get a cannabis event permit. You can't smoke or vape in locations where smoking is prohibited. This is basic common sense, people. No smoking means no smoking. You can't smoke cannabis within 1,000 feet of a school, daycare center, or youth center while children are present, unless you're in your own home undetected. Also, you can't use cannabis on federal land. Be careful if you go for a hike and end up in the Presidio. Let's see. It is still illegal to drive under the influence of cannabis. The market is creating a solution for how to test for levels of cannabis intoxication in real time. You can't be driving around with an open container, and employers can prevent or prohibit even off-duty use of cannabis by employees. But then the medical marijuana patients have been suing to gain ground in court to be able to have their medical rights protected. And like I said, cities and counties can have stricter laws than the state. Cannabis is a regulated land use. This is the part where I'm going to make your eyes cross. So I want to be clear about this is the bad and the ugly part. We're talking about in terms of good, bad, and ugly. Highly, highly regulated land use. You have to consider if you're looking at investing in a business or partnering with somebody or allowing a cannabis business to rent a space from you. Here's all the things that need to be considered. State licensing agreements, local organizations, use permits and conditions of approval, building permits and codes. There's going to be public hearings, and you bet there's going to be public opposition. You may need to have a CEQA review done. If there's any outdoor cultivation going on, we have to look at lake or stream bed alteration agreements. You have to make a plan for stormwater management, all sorts of issues there. And then, of course, there's the fees. So if anyone thinks still that money grows on trees in the cannabis industry, it does, but it's also very expensive to grow those trees. Here's a list of some of the different state agencies that have their hands in any particular business who wants to operate in the commercial cannabis market. There's your local government, there's the state agencies, and then there's more specific like Water Board and Fish and Wildlife. All these agencies have their hands in it. And you might imagine, if you've ever had the joy of dealing with state or local government officials, that you might notice that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And all of this is still so very new that our public officials who have been tasked with laying out this hugely complicated set of regulations, they haven't really hired a lot more people, and those people aren't being paid anymore. So we're also dealing with, people's just basic feelings about cannabis, whether they think it's useful, whether they think it's dangerous, and that affects people's speed at which they address issues and decision making. And it's really possible to be totally frustrated by one bad actor at any one of these agencies. Let's discuss the idea of hyperlocal control. So I alluded that local control is sort of a political compromise that was used to get MALCRSA passed. And that is that California is a huge state. Obviously, San Francisco, Alameda, these are counties that are way more liberal with their, adoption and even welcoming of commercial cannabis activity. But then if you go to some other places, like even Napa was really unfriendly for a long time. Sonoma's still pretty unfriendly, even though you can get permits. There are plenty of jurisdictions in California that still do not allow any commercial cannabis activity. So this was the way that the state was able to get these laws passed by saying, look, here's what the law of the land is going to be, but you, locality, can make your own rules that are a little bit stricter, even to the point of prohibiting commercial cannabis activity altogether. So you might have heard of a lawsuit that was filed by some local jurisdictions in California who are suing the state for the state still allowing cannabis delivery services to come and deliver cannabis to citizens who live within the borders of a jurisdiction that's decided to ban all commercial cannabis activity. Now, the intent of the local control is being violated by this delivery statute. And still no resolution there yet. But, they make a good point. And my counterpoint would be, cat's out of the bag. You can't stop it. Let's talk about how many different kinds of cannabis businesses there are. So these are direct cannabis businesses that I'm talking about. So there's licenses available for cultivating cannabis, indoor, outdoor, mixed light, you name it. Processing cannabis, once it's harvested, breaking it down, turning it into oil or something else. Manufacturing, filling it in cartridges, you name it. Distribution, some of the biggest business out there, kind of works the same way as the alcohol distribution model, except that there's a requirement that only the distribution facility can take the cannabis to a testing facility. And if you own an interest in in an entity that has a license to test cannabis before human consumption, then you may not own an interest in any other kind of cannabis business. And this is because we want to keep the testing pure. And then of course, the thing that you all see the most is retail. That's the point where it actually gets out to the consumer. All right, so quick recap. MAUCRSA allows local governments to allow all, some, or prohibit all commercial cannabis activities. Let's see, Humboldt County, for example, requires a zoning clearance. So they obviously, Humboldt's very friendly, but they have all their own little other permit hoops that you have to jump through. And one really important thing to remember, if you are considering an opportunity to invest in any way in a cannabis business, the local permits are often discretionary, meaning that the local government is not required to approve the permit, even if your application crosses all the T's and dots all the I's, and really there's no reason to deny it because you've met all of what they've requested you to do. They can still deny it anyways. So huge possibility of losing your entire investment out there if you're not getting the local government and state government approval that you need, which again is totally discretionary. Are you starting to get the sense yet that maybe this isn't such a moneymaker? What would a use permit require? This is what goes into an application for a permit to operate a cannabis business. Detailed application, all your local government forms, a full write-up of the project, where you're going to get your water from, impact on plants and animals, impact to cultural resources, traffic analysis, CEQA, you got to have your waste plan, your security plan, all those things ready to go. And then everything gets run through a public hearing where anybody can come and complain and try and block the locality from issuing you a permit. So what I'm trying to do here is give you the sense of how complicated it is to even open a legal cannabis business in California. And I cannot overstate the local risks and challenges. Local ordinances change. So if a piece of property that you're looking at purchasing and then turning around and selling it as a cannabis use property for a nice, pretty premium, be aware that the local government could change its mind about where the borders of the green zone are, which could affect that permittability. So, want to make sure you're avoiding liability for advertising a property as cannabis permittable when ultimately it is not. I'm actually dealing with a live arbitration about that right now. It ain't pretty. Local governments permits are issued 1 year at a time. So this is something that business owners are going to need to go through every single year. And remember, those permits are discretionary and local politics are very fickle. If someone doesn't like your face, you're going to have a really hard time getting your local permit. If them not liking your face is not based on any sort of protectable interest, like being a male or female or being black, white, brown, you name it. If they just don't like who you are for any non-discriminatory category, there's pretty much nothing you can do. I did mention that local planning departments are understaffed and really lacking the core competence to process applications. That's very true. And also your neighbors can and often will oppose your project. These are other things that the state license requires. So let me be clear here. You first have to get a license to operate from your locality, which then gives you the authority to then go up to the state and ask the state for a permit to operate. And then once you got the state's permit to operate, then you have to go back down to your locality to get the final approval. It is an unnecessarily bloated and super complicated process that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not a cool million, to even get one of these businesses going. This slide is designed to make you never want to touch any of this. I'm kidding. There are plenty of professionals who live this life cycle day in and day out. This is the actual life cycle of what a business owner would need to go through to become a licensed operating cannabis business in California. It's very difficult. And if you have an opportunity where someone is smooth talking you and saying this is going to be easy, no problem, they're lying to you and they're lying to themselves. All right, I'll start with the worst thing that can happen. Civil asset forfeiture. It's a real buzzkill. So civil asset forfeiture is the idea that the come in and seize real property and personal property if that real or personal property is being used in the commission of a crime. So here, of course, subject to the restrictions that I discussed at the beginning, if the federal government believes that the business that you're involved with is not operating properly under state law, and you as the landlord are allowing that, that means that the government could come and take your building, could come and take your property. So that's the biggest thing that landlords need to look out for. And so what that means is that if you're just the landlord and you are not involved in the underlying business, you have now abdicated your risk. You have now moved your risk about whether or not you get to keep your property onto the tenant. And so you have to be very involved with your tenant to make sure that your tenant is staying afloat and being state legal. One other huge practical challenge, and I get these questions a lot, is about cash payments. A lot of your cannabis businesses, especially the dispensaries and the cultivators, they operate in cash because there is serious banking restrictions. It is not illegal to bank cannabis money. That is a common misconception. It is expensive to bank cannabis money. There is federal government guidance on how to do it. Most banks just do not have the political or monetary wherewithal to hire more bank regulators, to hire more bank staff to work closely with the regulators to make sure that they can properly take cannabis money. But you can. If you're receiving money less than $10,000, you don't have to report it. If you're receiving $10,000 or more in cash, you do have to report it. And here's the form. It's not particular onerous. I haven't heard any stories of landlords who are meticulous about turning in these Form 8300s. I haven't seen any problems with that. You get into problems if you don't report, and your bank will eventually figure it out. This chart, although old, is showing that there are more and more institutions actively banking marijuana businesses day in and day out. There's a couple of local banks that I'm in talks with to become sort of their outside gut check about whose money to bank, because I have this kind of dispute angle on the world where I see all these terrible things that happen. This is just some up close on the FinCEN guidance that I'm showing you. So again, it's not illegal to bank cannabis money. It is expensive to bank cannabis money. Let's talk about some contract provisions. I'm gonna give you some nuts and bolts, and then at the end of the presentation, I'm gonna get into some of the more scary stuff here. So feel free to copy these. If you'd like a copy of this PowerPoint, I'd be happy to email it to you. Just let me know. As a landlord, these are things that you need to have in your leases if you are renting to a cannabis use property. You want your lease to be contingent upon the lessee obtaining all of the permits, variances, and government approvals. If your tenant is not government approved, you do not want them as your tenant, because that's when you start the risk of civil asset forfeiture. So everyone should be able to get out of it. Here's a contract provision to put in there about civil asset forfeiture. Like, let's get out and address it right at the front end. If there's federal intervention, then we're asking the tenant to be able to, the lessor terminates the lease and retain 3 months of security deposit. Or you can make this say pretty much whatever you want. I'm just giving you some sample language. Here's another big challenge that you need to consider for any sort of opportunity involving cannabis that you might be looking at, whether it's renting a property out to someone, becoming somebody's partner, just investing in a business, you name it. It cannot be overstated the terrible effect of IRS Section 280E. IRS Section 280E was passed in the 80s in response to a cocaine dealer who had a giant tax bill, who spent his time in jail writing off every single dime he'd paid to every thug he hired and every boat he chartered to bring his cocaine over to the United States. And the IRS was absolutely powerless to do anything about it. Hence, we have now IRS Code Section 280E that essentially says that businesses that consist of trafficking in controlled substances, which they still consider marijuana to be, they can only write off the cost of goods sold. So that means there's no tax deductions for what you pay your employees, what you pay in rent, nothing like that. So the effect, the practical effect, is that marijuana businesses that have not engaged with really experienced professionals to try and jigger things around to reduce the tax burden as much as possible are looking at an 80 to 90% tax rate. It's really bad. Also ugly. All right, so let's think about some of these practical considerations for real estate owners like yourself. So we discussed permittability, right? Very fickle, very difficult to do, very expensive and time consuming to accomplish. Then there's financing. You may have noticed that traditional financing is not available for properties that have a cannabis use. The big banks won't touch it. Title insurance generally won't touch it either. Although I will say with both of these, that's changing. I'm sure there are some people on this call who would say, I would finance a real estate transaction knowing that the property is going for a cannabis use. I've got a couple of friends that do it and I send them a lot of business. For title insurance, there are now 2 different title companies that I know of who will issue title insurance for a property that has been used for cannabis. So it's out there. And then liability and property insurance used to be something that was very difficult to get for cannabis businesses. And if you could get it, the premiums were so expensive that most people just decided not to go for it. And now there's been a sea change where in California, the insurance commissioner is pushing more and more companies to offer cannabis related products. And so insurance is more available and therefore getting cheaper. So I mentioned a couple times before that my whole angle on the cannabis industry is from the dispute position. I am a fighter, not a lover. We only handle litigation. And I can tell you, civil litigation runs the gamut in the cannabis industry. And so when you're thinking about what's good about investing in cannabis, it's sexy, it's fun, there is a potential to make a lot of money, it's medicine that helps people, all these wonderful things. You personally enjoy it. I mean, hell, I do. The big concern, like I said, civil asset forfeiture, but then also there is a hell of a lot of civil lawsuits going on in the cannabis space. So let's run through those real quick and make sure that you never, ever need to hire me because you will know what to look out for. The most common things I see are partnership disputes, breach of contract, and real property issues. There's also your basic corporate governance fights, securities issues with disgruntled investors, plenty of tax controversies, and lots of intellectual property fights, and then regular old employment matters. I mean, cannabis businesses sometimes are shocked to hear that they are held to the same employment law standard, both state and federally, as everybody else, even though they're federally legal. Same thing with securities. You still have to follow federal securities law, even though your business model is federally illegal. There's also environmental and water law concerns and serious product liability matters. Anyone who's in the supply chain is at risk for a product liability lawsuit. So that's another thing to consider if you're looking at investing. Let's talk about partnerships real quick. So MCRSA does not limit vertical integration. So you can seek to partner with businesses to own everything from cultivation all the way through retail, which means there's been a huge uptick in mergers and acquisitions. But there's a huge culture clash in the cannabis industry which I'm going to discuss in a second. And I cannot stress enough how important it is to make sure that if you're going down this road to look at a cannabis opportunity, that you engage professionals who have deep understanding of the industry and the rules that are so challenging for it. So that CPAs that understand, attorneys that understand. A lot of transactional attorneys don't build in dispute resolution procedures when they're drafting up, for instance, the bylaws or an operating agreement when you first start a business together. And a lot of entrepreneurs just don't consider what to do when things fall apart. The opportunity looks great, you love your partner, everyone's gonna make money. You still have to consider what's gonna happen when all that is not going so well. Receiverships are hard to obtain, but available for cannabis businesses so that the entity doesn't die while the owners are fighting. So let me explain to you about the culture clash. And this is my very favorite slide. So the folks that work and invest in the cannabis industry exist on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, there's what I call industry pioneers. These folks have been here on the front lines forever, and it is their work and their dedication that's gotten us to the point of the legal conversation today. On the other hand, there's the business community people who are newer to getting into the cannabis industry. Both ends of the spectrum tend to break down into two sets of folks. On the industry pioneer side, you've got your cowboys and your kumbayas. There are varying levels of sophistication and varying levels of capitalization among these. But I'll tell you, the cowboys are like, pew, pew, I've been living up the mountains growing weed for 40 years. I don't give a damn what your contract says. Come at me, bro. Those people are very difficult to do business with. Then there's the kumbayas, who are the true believers that cannabis is a healer, and they don't understand why you would threaten to sue them if they breach the contract. And like, can't we all just get along, man? You can imagine that some folks from the business community get very easily frustrated with the kumbayas. In the business community, on the other end of the spectrum, people also tend to break down into two categories, and I call these the movement or the money. There are plenty of sophisticated, well-capitalized, Harvard MBAs who really, truly believe that cannabis is good for the people, and they're down with the movement, and they're putting their money where their mouth is and bringing their expertise to the industry is how they're going to be able to move it forward. There's just as many people who are literally just in it for the money. And that makes for some really spicy disputes between, let's say, the kumbayas and the money people, or the movement and the cowboys. As the people who are interested in the movement don't understand the cowboys, and vice versa. Now, I'd like to say that the business community people are generally more sophisticated. That being said, there's something about cannabis that has caused otherwise very diligent, educated, risk-averse people to jump into situations involving cannabis businesses that would never be justified. The decisions that they made would never be justified if we were talking about a smoothie shop, for instance. So there's something about it that causes people to make strange decisions. I see it all the time. There's lots of breach of contract actions. We have an industry-specific problem insofar as generally in contract law, there's a prohibition on speculative damages for new businesses because you're not able to point back to historically how much money you would have made if the other party didn't breach the contract. We don't have that here. The industry is only 2 years old. California's Civil Code Section 1550.5, which was only passed in November 2017, stated finally that a contract involving commercial cannabis activity is a lawful object of contract. Previous to that section being passed in November 2017, there was a real risk that if you had to sue somebody over an interest in a cannabis business, that the judge would say, this whole contract violates the Controlled Substances Act. I'm not hearing it. Get out of my courtroom. So we've had to really rely on alternative dispute resolution in order to make it so that if you get into a business situation involving cannabis and it goes wrong, that you're going to go straight to arbitration. You keep it away from law enforcement, you keep the dispute away from the regulators, keep it private amongst yourselves. There's lots of landlord-tenant issues. When you're looking at leasing to someone, make sure that you negotiate out of a covenant not to use the space to violate any laws. Any cannabis business is going to be violating a slew of laws right away. The landlord must know what the tenant is doing. Landlords, you're no longer going to be able to turn a blind eye and say, I didn't know. There's a certification that has to go to the state with your signature on it. Also consider the law, and so I've already mentioned forfeiture, consider the law of fixtures as well. To take, for instance, an indoor grow facility, a giant warehouse. It takes hundreds of thousands of dollars and months of manpower to outfit a grow facility like that, to get the lights, the irrigation system, the fans, you name it. The technology on that stuff changes so fast. Try to negotiate at the front end to say, am I, landlord, going to be stuck with this stuff, or do I want to keep it, or are you guys going to take it because it's all, the technology moves as fast as iPhones. And by the end of the lease, you might not want that stuff in there anymore because it's not useful to you. Also be very careful with live-work arrangements. Cannabis cultivation is hardcore farming. And there's a lot of resident farmers who are then reluctant to leave. And then you've got a landlord-tenant problem on your hands when it was really just trying to house temporary workers. Then, of course, regulations are county by county. You've got to watch out for changing regulations that render operations out of compliance. And once you're out of compliance with state law, that's where the concern about losing the protection of the Rohrabacher-Blumenauer Amendment comes in. Investor fraud. There is a very high monetary barrier to entry into the cannabis industry, as I feel that I've shown for you. So a lot of these industry pioneers have to go and seek investment money, and many of them do not realize that giving investment money without voting rights constitutes a security. Businesses that are seeking investors need to offer an offering memorandum or a private placement memorandum. Let me say that again. If you are looking at an opportunity involving a cannabis business, if they're not able to produce to you right away an offering memorandum or a private placement memorandum, they're not ready to talk to you. Run. I mentioned before, even though cannabis is federally illegal, you still have to follow Federal Rule 506D and all state securities laws. And of course, all industry pioneers are going to tell you that their product is absolutely the best and it's going to be the best business ever. That's just how they all think. Don't believe them. Temper their excitement. Plenty of corporate disputes out there. Most industry pioneers do not understand the difference between a shareholders meeting and a directors meeting, or what an officer does versus what a director does, and really who's in charge. So there's a lot of unsophisticated operators out there, and it's very, very easy to get into a dispute with someone that you've entered a business with, even if all the personality and everything is there and the business model looks sound. There ends up being just basic challenges to not understanding how to run a business. Bankruptcy is a very tough topic in the cannabis world. There's a line of thinking that bankruptcy is not available for cannabis businesses, since bankruptcy is a federal law creature. There's a case called Arenas versus Trustee that said bankruptcy relief is unavailable to debtors whose business violates federal law. But thankfully, there have been some cracks in the wall, thanks to a case called Garvin versus Cook Investments. Actually, a bankruptcy court will consider a proposal of a bankruptcy plan that includes restructuring property ownership where the property is leased to cannabis businesses. So we're starting to get there, and I have heard tale of other cannabis dispensaries that have successfully gotten bankruptcy discharges. It's possible, but I think the more conservative advice is you need to be prepared that if this goes wrong, there is no bankruptcy safety net. So is it still a good idea to invest in cannabis? My answer is it depends. What's the state of the business? How far are they along in their licensing? What are the operators like? Are you dealing with cowboys or kumbayas? Do they have proper advisors in there? Do they have knowledgeable CPAs and attorneys? What's the local government environment like? Is there any risk that the local government's going to change where the green zone is? Has there ever been any litigation filed against the people that you're getting involved with? A lot of these folks are just serial fraudsters, and you will see their name come up in dockets over and over. If the specific thing that's being pitched to you, sounds really great, you should know that there's lots of really great pitches out there. So try and find where's the niche. And then the last question that I want you to ask yourself before you enter into a cannabis investment opportunity is, are you being irrationally exuberant? Are you being that person who thinks that cannabis is new and sexy and fun and you're going to make so much money and all red flags be damned? Maybe you could still make a lot of good money. It really, really depends. I will take questions now. I seriously love talking about this topic. Anyone that's attending today can shoot me an email and say, hey, saw your presentation. I'd love to talk to you. You can get 15 minutes of my time for absolutely free and maybe more if we're enjoying the discussion. That's my presentation for you today. I will stop sharing the screen and I'd love to hear your questions.
Yeah, very, very helpful, very informative, Katie. A lot of good feedback. So I do have some questions from the folks. Karen wants to know something about interstate travel.
Okay, so you are still not allowed to take cannabis across state lines. That being said, I was once at a conference in Colorado. It was a pot conference. They gave away joints as part of the thing. I'd left some in my purse. I thought I gave them all to the taxi driver, but when I was on the airplane flying back to California, I found those joints in my purse on the airplane. I did not get arrested. It made it through TSA.
That's funny.
Unless you're
So
very
the real advice is no, don't fly with it. Don't take it anywhere. Do not take it across state lines. But people do it, and TSA doesn't really know what to do with it. Function at your own risk.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, consume it before you cross state lines. So
There you go.
all right. I think there was a question from Janet. Which two title companies offer title insurance?
So Orange Coast Title. And then the newest one is actually someone I was just connected to through the Provisors Network, which, Bobby, that's how I know Jeff. So if you need that information, I'll have to go back and dig in my email and see who it was. But Orange Coast Title is the one that I know for sure is doing that. And then I've actually spent a lot of time talking to the General Counsel's office at First American Title. They desperately want to start offering title insurance to cannabis use properties. All the professionals, all the bankers, all the insurance guys, they all understand the opportunity to make money here. They're hamstrung by, the elders that exist in, in some of these really old institutions who just can't make the shift to jumping over. And I think everyone's waiting on the banking regulations to change too.
Yeah.
We're going to see more.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. There's a general question from, let me see, from Karen again. Is cannabis at a retail level, is that profitable?
The retailers are pretty profitable, especially if the retailer has done the work to do all the cost segregation issues and parse out the space. So if you've ever been inside a cannabis dispensary, you might notice that there's like a corner that has a table with brochures on it, or there's t-shirts and hats for sale, or they do like a yoga hour, once a week, and they charge for that. To the extent that the square footage of the building is being used to sell something that is not a Schedule I drug, yoga, hats, you name it, you conduct things that go to that part of your business. So, the successful retailers are the ones who have put in a lot of effort at the front end to try and reduce that tax burden as much as possible.
Got it. Any guidance for giving loans to cannabis businesses? In other words, should people be lending money to cannabis business operators? And I know you touched on the offering memorandum and the PPM, but any other guidance?
Sure. So let me start with the cannabis industry is hungry for capital. The term irrational exuberance came from a colleague of mine that wrote an article back at the end of 2019 when the initial flood of money came in, and then that we call that irrational exuberance money. It's since started to dry up by the end of 2019, and now especially with the whole COVID crisis, cannabis businesses are not eligible for any federal relief under the CARES Act currently. So they're desperate for private capital. It's not a problem to loan money to a cannabis business. Not a problem at all. So long as you've done your diligence on this company, right? Are these people that are, what's the credit score of the owners of the business that are involved? get ye a personal guarantee.
Yeah.
No way should this be an unsecured debt whatsoever. There's also a lot of one way that some cannabis businesses are getting funding is through factoring agreements, which are extraordinarily unfriendly to the lender, or it's to the person who borrowed the money, but great for the lender. So that's another vehicle that people use. So I'm saying if you're looking at investing such that it's not just a loan, right? You're looking for some bigger return on investment than just the 10% capital, or excuse me, 10% cap on interest that you can charge. Yeah, there's a potential to make a lot of money out there. But like I said in my last slide there, it depends on all of these things. Who are you dealing with? How long have they been involved? Are these people trustworthy? What's their character? Those sorts of things. But that being said, if you find the right one and all those things look good and you make an investment that levels their business up, then yeah, you all stand to make a lot of money.
Yeah, no, very good advice. So I would say do your due diligence and do extra due diligence for in this case.
That's an interesting point too. So, a lot of regular due diligence, a lot of these guys who have been in the cannabis industry a long time, they're going to have criminal convictions. And so, don't DQ these people right off the bat simply because they have a criminal conviction for cultivation or possession or distribution. It was wrongly criminalized for a really long time, so that shouldn't be a disqualifier, but a lot of people tend to stop right there. And so, don't be afraid to ask questions about the arrest that occurred and, what they've done since then. Of course, if they're now operating in the legal market, the public policy behind the whole Malcursa scheme is to try and get people into the light. And that's why there was a 1-year forgiveness provision. Like if you didn't have all your licensing in place by January 1, 2018, they gave you another year to try and come into the legal fold. And there's finally been a pickup in law enforcement activity at the state level against unlicensed operators. They're still out there. Somehow there are still many, many people who grow, distribute cannabis who have not heard about all the requirements that I just went through.
No, those are the cowboys and the kumbayas. Yeah. Let's see. People are looking for your contact information. I'm sure you'll give it out again.
Sure. I'll put it in the chat here.
Sure. And then which community banks now take on cultivators as clients?
So that answer changes all the time because once word gets out that a particular banking institution will bank cannabis money, there is a run on the bank, and then they're pretty much not offering anything beyond the people that they've already signed up. So it's very hit or miss. I had a client recently who just signed up with a local bank in Fresno. I found someone else who was able to work with Community Bank of the Bay. I've been in talks with the guys at Bank of San Francisco, and they want the cannabis money too. There's a credit union called North Bay Credit Union up in Santa Rosa that has a lot of cannabis accounts. There's a bank in Colorado called SunTrust that is specifically for banking cannabis money. It's really expensive, but if we're talking about, a multi-state operational cannabis company that, transacts $1 billion every year, then they can afford the $15,000 a month due diligence fee that SunTrust charges.
Got it. Wow, a lot of questions. This must be a very popular topic.
Keep it coming, guys. I love it.
Mike, Carly's asking, what do farmers typically look for when looking for land?
So we're looking for something that has, first of all, it's in the green zone. It's in a zone that the local area says is okay to apply for a permit to cultivate cannabis. Water, there's got to be water available there, and not just siphoning off the local stream. Considering fire access. If you're going to do a decent sized cannabis cultivation grow, what ends up happening now, we have these wildfires every year, is that Cal Fire wants to partner with a lot of these cultivators to come in and tap their water resource, because these guys are up in the hills. That's going to be our best, closest source of water to try and combat the fires. It depends on what particular cultivators like. Some people, if you're going to remove any trees on the property, that needs to go through the county as well. Another interesting piece is that if the property was used for illegal cannabis cultivation before, counterintuitively, that gives you a pass to the front of the line. So a lot of cultivators actually like to work with properties that have been illegal grows before, especially if we can get in contact with the guys who are doing it before and bring them into the fold for the purpose of getting through the regulatory process to get the permit.
Makes sense. Makes sense. All right, last question. At what point in the supply chain are the most investment dollars going? Given your where are the most dollars going in this in the supply chain?
So I think that the most unsophisticated dollars go to cultivation. It's cultivating a field of outdoor cannabis. I mean, you're looking at like $1 million for the field to prepare the soil and get all. It's extraordinarily expensive. I think the best investment opportunity is actually at the testing level. It's sort of the most sophisticated. You can only, if you hold an interest in a testing license, you can only hold interest in testing. And there is a severe shortage of reliable cannabis product testing. And so these labs, can pretty much charge whatever they want. This is something that really should be government, the government should be the one testing it so that cultivators aren't going from lab to lab to lab in order to get the result that they want. The science hasn't fully developed there, but there's, that's an opportunity where the lab itself has a lot of equipment that needs to be purchased. So if you're going to finance something like that, that's a good quick thing. And that's the one that's always going to have demand. All the cannabis has to go through testing, and it's become this little bottleneck. The other thing that I see doing really well is the delivery services. The delivery services are super profitable at the retail level, especially during a global pandemic. And currently the delivery businesses can reach areas that otherwise do not permit commercial cannabis activity. So that ups their bottom line as well. And then the distribution folks are also another linchpin point there. Distribution facilities often need to be upgraded. I would go for a testing lab. But let me make a very clear point here. I don't invest in the cannabis industry.
Very difficult. Yeah.
Of course, I only see things that fall apart, right? And no one's coming to me being like, hey, I've got this wonderful opportunity. Everyone's coming to me saying, oh my God, my business partner screwed me so hard. How am I going to recover from this?
Yeah, that's what happens. All right.
So I'm maybe not the best person to ask.
No. You're a good person to ask. It's not the rosy colored glasses. So Yana, any questions from you for Katy?
No, Katy, thank you for that great information. Such a hot topic.
Yeah.
Appreciate having you.
Well, we might have to have you back here updating the rest of the audience. But yeah, this is a tough business, and because it's a tough business, that's where some of the opportunities are. But it's not for everybody. It makes owning Section 8 properties like a walk in the park. So yeah, this is it's not for the faint of heart. So Katy, thank you so much. Truly appreciate your time. And guys and gals, thank you I hope you finished your lunch and you learned something. We're going to do again another event on Thursday about the future of housing and how we're going to use. Thanks, Janet. So come to listen to James Ehrlich on noon on Thursday, and we have Saturday syndications coming up this Saturday. So hope to see you then. And
And
otherwise, have a great day. Thanks, Katie.
one quick thing, Bobby.
What's that?
Oh, I was just going to say, for those of you that found out about this class on Facebook, please join our meetup group. And for those of you that found out about this class on the meetup group, please join our Facebook group.
That's right. That's right. We will send out links to both, but we have Yana and I are starting a new Facebook group to keep everybody connected and networking after these events. So, thank you, everybody. Take care. Okay. Bye bye. Bye bye.